Hello and welcome to the Adepticon Preview Show 2024. My name's Lewis and I'll be your host for this brand new show, bringing you all the latest releases from the Warhammer universe. We've got announcements from Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Warhammer 40,000, Warcry, Warhammer Underworlds, Warhammer the Old World, Kill Team and loads more. There's certainly something for everyone and we're busy. So, without further ado, let's get started with our first reveal.
Let the galaxy burn! It looks like the Chaos Space Marines are back and their long war is going to be fought with renewed vigour with the return of the Chaos Space Marines. Now, thanks for joining us. We've got Stu and Josh from the Warhammer studio here. Thanks for joining us, guys. So we've got shiny new miniatures and 2 new battle forces as well. Tell us all about them.
Yeah, so 2 Chaos Lords, a return of a popular kind of fan favourite in the Chaos Lord Jump Pack. So he comes back in a battle force with some Raptors and a load of other Chaos Space Marine stuff. And then we've also got the other battle force, which contains a brand new multi-part Chaos Lord with all kinds of different options. He's got Demon Hammer, he's got Axe, different pistols. So yeah, very exciting.
That's so cool. And 2 battle forces as well.
2 battle
forces. The same release.
Yeah.
There's too much chaos for one box.
There is too much chaos for one box. And we also tried to make sure that both of those boxes give you a slightly different kind of miniatures collection. So actually, if you want to go all in and get both, it just gives you a really good collection of Chaos Space Marines.
That's really cool. Now, of course, no release like this is complete without the Codex.
Sure.
What can Chaos Space Marine fans and new Chaos Space Marine fans expect from the new Codex?
Like lots of the codexes that we've done recently, we've refreshed all the background, we've added a load of stuff from the events of the Arcs of Omen, so the return of Vashtor, and his pact with Abaddon to finally try and get closer to overthrowing the rule of terror. His planetary engine, the Wormwood, is back in real space. So some more adventures of Vashtor. A load of great rules content as well. So 8 new detachments, I think, Josh, isn't it?
8 new detachments.
Wow.
So I think we keep the index attachment, but that's been updated. And then there's now 7 new detachments, depending on however you want to play. Do you want to play with a cultist horde? Do you want to play with all your demon engines? Do you want to play like that, the Alpha Legion style, which is all infiltrating and sneaking up on people? Whichever your style is, there's a way to play now.
That's fantastic. So whichever army you've got, you can sort of switch between detachments and play the way you want to play. That's cool.
Yeah.
An entire army of expendable cultists sounds awesome.
There is an entire army
There
of
is,
expendable
yes.
cultists, yeah. There's
And traitor guardsmen as well.
traitor guardsmen.
Yeah.
There's also others, as Josh said, that kind of lean into a particular style that we associate with some of the legions. So there's a kind of a sneaky kind of Alpha Legion-y kind of one. There's another one that enables you to play kind of tanks and siege engines, which has got a bit of an Iron Warriors vibe. But if you want to play a Night Lord siege force, knock yourself out.
Any word bearers in that book, guys?
There are word bearers in that book.
Had to be somewhere in there.
There are, yeah.
They always sneak in there.
They do, and that detachment that is really focused on the one from the Index really leans into their kind of pacts with the different Chaos Gods and the different marks. So that one's a great way to represent your word bearers.
Cool. Can Chaos Space Marine players still make dark pacts with the gods?
Yes, they can, yeah. And that's all the detachments still can. So that
cool.
isn't locked to just the word bearers. The Dark Pact is their army ability. So you still have that. You can still go for your lethal or sustained hits. So that they'll still be enjoying that ability as they go through the game.
We really wanted to make sure that the whole Chaos Space Marine army has a very different feel to the Loyalist Marine armies. Fundamentally, they're all like big dudes in power armor, right? So how do we make those things feel differently? Really leaning in from the Chaos Space Marines to the fact that they are empowered by the Dark Guards. They make those pacts, both from a rules point of view, but also, the miniatures themselves, you see them, they don't just look like Space Marines that have gone evil. They're kind of corrupted by the warp and fused with the dark powers. So we really want to do that across everything, the artwork, the rules, the background sections, the photography, really trying to capture the dark glory of chaos.
That's brilliant.
Oh, fantastic. I'm excited. So going back to the two battle forces we've got, so the Dread Talons really appeal to me because I have a penchant for close combat, I think it's fair to say. So tell me about that set.
That one would be perfect for you, Si. It's really close combat focused. You've got the new Jump Pack Lord with his Raptor Bodyguard. You've also got the Demon Prince in there. You can build that as a winged Demon Prince. So again, super fast, super fighty. And then the rest of that box is rounded out by a Cultist Horde, the Accursed Cultists and Cultists, kind of at least something that can hold on to the objectives that you've fled past and you're, you're on rushing charge. Yeah. So yeah, great box for you.
I like an expendable core for my army.
You see, I think I'm a bit more tactical than that. So the Veterans of the Long War box would appeal more to me. It's more of an archetypal Chaos Space Marine force, right?
Yeah, so that one you have your Chaos Lord on foot, and then you've got the Legionaries in there, which he can join, or he can join his Chosen as his elite bodyguard, and then you've got that Anviled Hammer unit with the Terminators to control the board. They're not quite as fast, so you're probably going to have to spend a little bit of time getting there, but you don't die anywhere near as quickly, so...
Drop them into the heart of the enemy and slaughter them wholesale.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So either one, very different play styles, but you can enjoy them both. So.
Yeah, and they complement each other as well. So, why not get both?
So there we go. We've got two exciting new battle forces coming up very shortly for you guys. Stu, Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure talking about those. Thank you so much.
What a way to start, and that's not the only thing from the 41st millennium we've got to show you. So don't go anywhere, 40k fans, there's plenty more where that came from. Next up, we're travelling deep within the
Marvel, which is a giant, horrible creature beast. It's really cool. It's a really nasty, horrible piece of terrain, which we'll get to in a little bit. So the Tyrannic cohort are a bit of an oddball one for the Ossiarch Bone Reapers because they're effectively exiled constructs. So the thing is with the Ossiarch Bone Reapers is very little goes to waste. Okay, everything is built for a purpose, and sometimes the purpose is punishment. Okay, so each of the creatures in the Tyrannic cohort, in addition to the Centaurs in charge, are creatures who are being punished by the Ossiarch Bone Reaper for some kind of perceived failure. So, we all know that the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, never flee, never retreat, win all the battles all the time. Well, that's just patently not true. Okay, every now and again, something doesn't go quite right.
Definitely in my case, yeah.
And either it's somebody's fault, at which point you're to blame, or, today it's your fault, so you're to blame. So what you end up with is a group of very fast, very mobile outriders. And part of the exile is they don't want you around anymore. Okay, so these creatures get sent out into the very outer wilds of the various different mortal realms. And in this instance, this particular warband has ended up in the Narwood because no one really wants to go in there. And the Ossiarch Bone Reapers are already starting to twitch a little bit because of the vast amounts of beast bone that they'll be made from. And these are no exception. So they're crazed, ferocious, feral, but they've also got a certain element of clinical, death-like emotionless about them as well. So they're a warband of paradoxes. Very cool.
And the models are fantastic.
The models are very cool. Have you noticed the single eye?
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So that's effectively the hook there is with the eyes of Catacross. So not Catacross himself specifically looking through them, but their masters can just see through their eyes because they're effectively outriders. So so the Centroid is in charge of all this. And it's his job to kind of keep everything in line and make sure and whip things into the right place and get things going where they're supposed to be. And the warband itself has a unique mechanic which doesn't exist in other warbands across Warcry yet, which is quite cool. So we're trying to investigate different ways of applying resources that everyone's familiar with in very different ways. So what they get to do is they get to spend wild dice when they're using their abilities in order to empower them. So you get a short-term reward, and the opportunity cost there is that later on you're not going to have that wild dice to get initiative or boost a triple into a quad, whatever it might be. That's very much their shtick, as it were. They're quite powerful individually. Certainly the two bodyguards and the Centroid are very strong. They're pretty decent fighters overall. The other fighters in the warband, the Bone Beasts and the Harpies, they're not quite so powerful, but obviously they make up for that by just sheer mobility and being able to support your other fighters in their attacks.
Now we've got a Sylvaneth warband in the box as well, the Twist Wheels.
Yeah, absolutely, very exciting. Okay, so the Twist Wheels are really cool. So their background is that each and every one of them is infected. Okay, they are not regular Sylvaneth at all. They've got a horrible infection which is corrupting them from the inside out. And one of the reasons they're called the Twist Wheel is because the Alariel Song of Life, they hear it in a very different way. It's all corrupt to them. The strains are all very different, so they don't quite interact with them the same way. And what they're doing is they're trying to get back to Alariel in order to be cured. So the Swarm Sage in particular has dedicated themselves to trying to cure the Twist Wheel of their corruption and obviously expose themselves to it as well. And the danger is there that you get cut off from the Song of Life completely and you end up with this horrible warped, twisted creature. And no one really knows what happens there. But what the Swarm Sage is effectively doing is easing out the corruption, because corruption's like, you can see it on the models themselves, and the Swarm Sage uses its little crazy swarm stuff to just chew off the corruption and literally tear it out of their flesh. And it hurts, it's rubbish. But there's power in that, because once the corruption's torn out of you, you become more energized and you're able to hear that Song of Life a little bit better. The warband itself functions around the leader, dealing damage to your fighters in order to boost them up.
Oh, great.
And they can heal themselves as well, because naturally, healing is a huge part of the Sylvaneth fiction. But the actual playstyle of the warband is, you want to go hit things, because that's part of Warcry, go stab things, profit. But at the same time, you need to manage your fighters who are quite fragile very, very carefully, otherwise they'll fall over dead by the time you boosted them up.
Is it more difficult than it sounds, or is it about as difficult as it sounds?
It's not terribly difficult, because the damage that she deals to your fighters is locked behind abilities. So you need to have the abilities in order to be able to do it.
Okay.
So most of the time you're like, I've got my status, I've got my fighting stats, just like a regular game of Warcry. And where I go from there is I've got to decide who gets damaged when by the abilities I've got, and then obviously you can heal them up as well. Okay, and then the quad is pretty beefy as well. It can do a lot of damage. I think probably one of the most interesting things for this warband are the variety of different fighters. So you've got some corrupted dryads in there, which are regular dryads, but again, they've got the horrible corruption. It's actually a lot stronger and a lot tougher than a regular dryad. And you've also got some tree revenants in there as well, with a variety of weapons you've not seen before. So there's a tree revenant there with quite a large bow, and they've got a very interesting profile. I'll be very excited to see what people do with that, because it's damage done in a very, very different way. A range damage, I should say, done in a very different way that we normally do it in Warcry. And then you've got some fighters who are actually quite tough for Sylvaneth fighters. There's some toughness 5 fighters in there with shields, which is quite good. And again, the spear gives you extra bit of reach. And then, of course, there's the corrupted Spite Revenant with the Briar Lash hand, which is particularly vicious if you get them in the right place at the right time.
Now, John, this box also comes with what must be my favourite terrain piece for Warcry for a long time, the Ravening Gnarlmaw. Tell me all about it.
Well, you've chosen a good one to be your favourite. It's one of the more creepy pieces I've seen so far. So the Ravening Gnarlmaw is a terrifying piece of kit. So it's like any other Gnarloak. It's a giant predatory flesh tree that burrows into you, drinks your blood, and then hangs you from its branches to just slowly drain the life out of you.
Oh man, it's an awful place.
It's horrific. Now, these things are terrifying, and the Gnarlwood is full of them. And of course, the Gnarlwood is also full of just people who live there or around it. And every now and again, they get it into their heads that maybe they can kind of half tame one of these things. Now, that's impossible. It's a laughable concept. Taming anything in Gur is generally a very bad idea. So what they do is they kind of tie its roots down a bit to make sure it doesn't move off too much or eat them in their sleep, okay? And then they make like a little sacrificial altar out of it. And when a Gnarloak doesn't really need to go anywhere to feed, it kind of turns into one of these things. It's one of the many different creatures this thing can spawn out of, because obviously the magic in the realm can twist things in all kinds of horrible manners. So effectively what people will do is they'll go, okay, as long as we feed you, could you just scare off all the other Gnarlokes and maybe eat whatever isn't us? Now the Gnarloak has absolutely no concept of like actually what's going on really, it just gets fed every day, so it sits still, right? But yeah, people will drag it up onto that bamboo platform, chuck people into the maw, kick people, and then you can do that during the game as well, which is obviously tons of fun. You know, you've got to be really careful if you're standing up. But you know, it provides a bit of it provides players an interesting question when they're playing the game that, okay, so it's a platform, it's high up, it's a vantage point, it's quite a useful place to be. And if there's an objective up there, there's a treasure token or something, you really want to go up there, you've got to be quite careful. You don't just move up there, pick up the treasure and then end your turn, because otherwise, you know, in comes the clothesline and over you go and you're dead.
John, thank you so much for talking to us about Warcry, Briar and Bone. Thank you guys too, but stay around, there's more on the way. So there we go, the new Warhammer Underworlds box is just over the horizon. My name's Nick and I've got John with me from the Warhammer studio to talk all about it. John, good to have you here, man.
Thank you very much.
What is Wintermoor? Tell me.
So Wintermoor is the next evolution in the story of Deathgorge. So Deathgorge was a large ravine, and now what happened is we've gone beneath that again to even deeper underworlds.
It's even colder
We're now
down
under
there.
the underworlds. Yeah, it's absolutely awful down there. No one's having any fun. It is a miserable, horrible, cold, frigid place to be. There are horrible giant worms trying to eat you alive. There are horrible parasites crawling in the dark, trying to eat your brain and drink your soul. It's just terrible. And obviously we've got these poor unfortunates here who are right bang in the middle of it.
They've not even wrapped up warm. Look at them.
No, not even. They've got faith and absolute craziness to keep them warm. So their delusions are keeping them well toasty.
So, of course, it's the new season box. It's perfect place to start playing the game, of course.
Unquestionably.
And also great for people who already play the game as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's something here for everybody. If you're a current fan of Warhammer Underworlds, you've got 2 brand new war bands, you've got a stack of Rivals decks in there as well, loads of different play styles, loads of cool new mechanics to engage with. And if you're brand new to the game, again, it's absolutely perfect. You've got everything in there you need to play the game. You've got your rule book, you've got war bands, you can play against somebody else. They don't even need to get their own box set. You can just play both the same one. And they've all got Rivals decks. So there's plenty of like replayability in there as well. You can swap Rivals decks around. You can do Nemesis. You can do Rivals, whatever you like. So loads to get stuck into there.
Now we've got to talk about the miniatures in this box because they are just brilliant. There's 2 brand new war bands in here. Tell us about them, John. What we got?
So where would you like to start? Would you like to start with the delusional Flesh Eater Courts or the arguably just as delusional Brethren of the Bolt?
We'll start with the slightly more delusional ones.
Slightly more delusional ones. All right, so we'll go for the Flesh Eater Courts. So this particular warband, their whole shtick is walking up to enemy fighters and whacking lumps off them with their massive cleavers and chains and hooks and all the rest of it, and preparing the meat in the perfect way to serve their lord. And they're broadly speaking an aggro-style warbands. What that means for people who don't understand the term is they're all about getting stuck up in your face and shanking you with all the horrible rusty cleavers and spikes that they've got attached to themselves. And the way this warband functions, which is very different, is that there's no recursion. People don't come back to life. So ordinarily what would happen is as soon as you kill a ghoul, 3 more to replace them. However, these are all very, very highly trained chefs, right? They're the absolute peak of their art. So they're not very easy to replace. And as a result, you only get what you start with.
Okay, so they sound absolutely disgusting, but on the other side of the board, we've got the Brethren of the Bolt.
Correct.
Who are these guys?
Okay, so the Brethren of the Bolt are they're part of the Cities of Sigmar faction. Broadly speaking, they're all human.
For now.
Mileage may vary. And they are effectively the worshippers of Sigmar. They're the crazy flagellant side of things. However, they have a very, very unique alignment in the sense that they've all been in some way, shape or form struck by lightning. Now, some of them believe that they were intentionally struck by Sigmar's divine lightning. Some of them were just hitting the head really hard. But they've all got some kind of interaction with the Azirian heavenly divine lightning in some way, shape or form. And they do a couple of unique things. There's 2 really big ones that I'd like to touch on in the time we've got, which is that the first one is they all start inspired because they start with this kind of etheric charge attached to them. Every time they blast you with their divine tasers, what happens is all that charge goes out of them, nukes whatever's in front of you, and then all the lightning goes away. At which point they need to be recharged. So what happens is, as you fight through, you can fight through your fighters. So which can increase the range of your melee attack actions, which is really, really good. So it means you're never really quite safe as the opponent. You've really got to play around them very carefully. But effectively, whenever you tase an enemy through one of your friends, they inspire again and they get charged up, which is great. They're a lot of fun to play. They're quite hilarious. Some of the cards are very funny too, and they're really cool.
So the Wintermore box doesn't just come with those warbands, it also comes with 2 Rivals decks that anyone can use for any warband. Tell us about those.
Absolutely. So again, really good incentive to get the box set if you don't even collect these warbands. And of course, when you're playing them, you can swap them around as much as you like. So we start with Rhymeworm's Bite, which is effectively an environmental disaster deck. So these horrible giant worms just come ploughing through the board and just devour everything in their path. And what the deck allows you to do is not necessarily manipulate them, but effectively get out of the way first.
Now there's a second Rivals deck in there as well called the Hungering Parasite deck, which is really unique, isn't it? How does it work?
Okay, so the Hungering Parasite is a tiny little fragment of the God Beast Krakatoa, which is this horrible big amorphous glob goo thing. And this tiny little fragment is frozen off and broken. So it's this tiny little bit of a god beast that's scuttling around. And effectively it's just this frozen chunk. And then whenever something living gets near it, it thaws just enough to just latch onto it. The deck is designed towards, it's a really control style deck. You've got to manipulate the position of either the fighter with the parasite, be it yours or your opponent's, or you've got to kill people with the parasite, or you've got to make sure the parasite's in the right place at the right time. It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds it.
Because obviously your fighter's uninspired, so they're just not good. They're probably never going to get much better throughout the course of the game. But in addition to that, at the end of a round, if there's no one for the parasite to latch onto, it feeds. Okay, so if there's enemies nearby, they all get staggered, which is great. And if there's no enemies nearby, then the fighter with the parasite takes damage.
Okay.
Which will eventually kill them.
John, thank you so much for coming to talk to us about Warhammer Underworld's Wintermore. It's been great to look through the box sets, but keep with us, guys. There's more coming up soon.
Some fantastic releases there, and that's not the only announcement we'll have for Warhammer Age of Sigmar during the show either. What could it be, I hear you cry? Well, more on that later. Until then, check these out.
Oh, wow, what a miniature. Abraxia, Spear of the Everchosen. We are joined here by Matt and Phil from the Warhammer Studio, guys. Pleasure to have you with us to talk about this great new miniature. Phil, I'll start with you. Abraxia, who is she?
She is none other than the right-hand woman of Archaon Everchosen. This woman is in control of the Varangard. That is no small feat because, of course, every member of the Varangard is a Chaos Lord or above. And so she has essentially got incredible martial power. She's been tasked with striking into Gyran and snuffing out the flames of hope that Sigmar has established there. Now, she has a spear, Gorbolgo, which is like essentially a mutating spear. Anything touched by that will turn into an awful chaos spawn. It will also mutate her unless she keeps the reins, unless she keeps her concentration. And the one time she had a lapse of concentration, horns grew out of her head. It's essentially
I hate when that happens.
It's a test. It's a test from Archaon. That spear is very dangerous stuff to see if she's worthy of the role. And she's riding the Thanatorg, this great scaly beast. She hits like a ton of bricks, and behind her come the Swords of Chaos themselves.
That's so cool.
So the inner core of the Varangard, aren't they? The Swords of Chaos?
Absolutely, yeah. And we see her essentially cutting a red swathe through Gyran. It doesn't go all her way. She unfortunately contracts something rather nasty in the process from the Flesh Eater curse and starts to get the delusion of the Flesh Eaters. And she has to go and deal with that by conquering a certain place. But no spoilers. You have to wait and see.
That's great.
Minor spoilers.
Minor spoilers. Minor spoilers. Yeah.
That can't be helping keep on top of her spear, can it?
Well, indeed. Well, that's the journey. We, right from the get-go, we see a character that is really having to keep the balance and hang on, for dear life. And whether she makes it through, whether she has the willpower and the skill, you'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, quite overt price of power.
Yeah. Well, it's Archaon's world, so
yeah.
This is the big leagues, and she, as you can see when you see her on the battlefield as well.
So speaking of which, she comes as part of Abraxia's Varan spear, so it's her and 3 Varangard. That sounds devastating. How does she play on the battlefield?
Yeah, so obviously, given her role on the battlefield kind of as the head of the Varangard, she has very, very strong synergy, particularly very strong command synergy with Varangard. So really, really cool seeing that. As Phil talked about, her kind of mutating spear that can have a risk for herself, can power up, can kind of do damage and mutate nearby enemies. But it's really the synergy with the Varangard where you're really getting that big value. You can also take Abraxia with Battle Line Varangard in her Army of Renown featured in the book. And that gives you a whole new host of tricks to build and play with an army that is one of the most elite armies, if not the most elite armies, in all of Age of Sigmar, really focusing in on the Varangard and their power.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
I'm going to get painted straight away.
You'd probably expect nothing less from Archaon's Left Television.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, Matt. Phil, if you don't mind hanging around, we've got more with you very shortly. So hang around, folks. We've got more to come.
So over the course of the Dawnbringer's story arc, we've seen 2 crusades, the twin-tailed crusade we call it, head out from Hammerhal Aksha, and Hammerhal Gyra in Gyran. And they have had so many trials and tribulations over the course of this storyline. We've seen them rise and fall, have moments of triumph and moments of real tragedy. So what we've seen in Hammerhal Aksha is the crusade heading out eastwards. They think they've found somewhere there that is viable, that they can defend, which is the ruins of an old city called Embergard. And it's kind of like a haunted place, really, and they had a lot of trouble with nasties in the basement, the Night Haunt that dwelt there, but they have now managed to claim that space, and Sinestra and the Cult of the Wheel have taken that place with conviction and faith. Now in Gyran, we've seen them thrash their way through jungles and forests, scabrous sprawl, swamplands, mangroves. They've basically had a horrible time of it trying to get up north to found their own city called Verdigris. Verdigris is looking like maybe that's going to work out, but we'll see what happens over the course of Dawnbringer 6. Abraxia, the Spear of the Everchosen, she is the right-hand woman of Archaon himself, the Supreme Grand Marshal of Chaos, and she's part of the Varangard. The Varangard are like elite Chaos Lords. Every one of them is sort of Chaos Lord power. She's fought her way up from the fighting pits of the Varanspire. Ever since she was a child, she's been really good with a spear, and she has no morals at all about who she kills and when she kills them, so she is a real fearsome character. The only catch here is that Archaon doesn't fully trust her and actually wants to test her. So he's given her the spear called Bolga, this magic spear, and although it mutates everything it touches, so all you need to do is scratch your enemy and then they devolve into a horrible spawn thing, it can also do that to the wielder if the wielder loses their concentration. That did happen once in Abraxia's history, and that's why she has those horns. It only took a momentary lapse of her concentration and she started to mutate. So with that spear, Archaon is testing Abraxia, provided she stays in control. So long as she does, things are peachy, but she cannot afford to fail. So we talked a bit about Abraxia right at the top end, the higher echelons of the Chaos power struggle. Right at the bottom there we have tribesmen, basic people like you and I who are trying to get by out in the wilderness, and the Dark Oath exemplify that. They make bargains with the Dark Powers to try and survive, and Gunnar Brand and his family are a great example of that. So Gunnar Brand himself is not just a big fighter, he's very powerful in combat, but he's also kind of the brains of the operation. He's a very clever dude, and he doesn't really want to see his family slide into chaos. Neither does he want to particularly kowtow to Sigmar. He, like all Dark Oath, he's got a massive chip on his shoulder about the fact that Sigmar basically bailed on them, and they had to resort to these dark methods to survive. He's got his daughter Singri with him, a sort of expert horse archer. Tanari Tackblood is his rival, the War Queen. Now, unfortunately, it's not that simple if you're enthralled to chaos. He starts getting involved in the Archaon's grand plan and the pawns that are moving around the board, and some hidden forces that are lurking in the shadows that are also effectively using the Dark Oath as pawns. So running parallel to this story, we also see some old friends, Vandus Hammerhand and Korgos Kol, the mighty lord of Khorne, his nemesis. Now these are characters we brought into play at the beginning of the Realmgate Wars, many years ago, 8-9 years ago now. It's gone from essentially a small vendetta into an all-consuming passion for Vandus Hammerhand. All he wants is to get his revenge on Kull. Kull killed his sons in a former life, way back when he was mortal, and he is definitely obsessing about it now. It's kind of bringing things off kilter and actually maybe splitting the crusade and splitting the loyalties of the people that should be united in the face of chaos to pursue his own agenda. Now Korgos Kul, all he needs to turn into a demon prince is that last skull to cap his pyramid, to the real capstone to what he's been working on all these years. And so he has his own agenda, and it doesn't go the way you think it might. So I'm looking forward to people seeing how that story, that ancient rivalry, actually ends in Dawnbringers. So Dawnbringers is not only ending an era, the era of the Beast, where we've seen destruction in the driving seat. We see that come to an end in Dawnbringers, but we also see the beginning of a new era. And there are signs for those who are paying attention of what that might be and where that might lead. On a personal level as well. So Vandus is a good example of that. He is not his former self, and his journey, he's almost exemplary of what the Stormcast have to deal with as they die and are reforged and die and are reforged, and their souls pay the price over time. So where his journey leads is really interesting, and we'll open a new chapter of the story as a result of that. So one of the great things about the Dawnbringers series is we've seen people on the ground, boots on the ground story, but throughout that there have been little happenstances and agendas and clashes where a greater story is unfolding, and it's been done in secret. It's behind the scenes because the people orchestrating that story, and I'm talking gods here and demigods, are not keen on showing their hand until the last minute, and it ends with this great climactic explosion of violence. Of course it does, it's Warhammer, and the Mortal Realms will never be the same again.
So that was a fantastic video showing off Dawnbringers 6. Here with me is Phil. Thank you for joining me.
No problem.
So we've seen the Twin-Tailed Crusade set off from Hammerhall Akshar and Hammerhall Gyra. They faced an awful lot of trouble getting to where they are.
That's fair.
Can you sort of summarise what the Dawnbringer story has brought us so far?
Yeah, so we've seen two crusades, and by crusades, these are definitely the largest that the Sigmarite cities have put out yet. Statement of intent, really. Sigmar has to put his flag in the sand and say, everything's going fine, by the way, and we're definitely founding these cities. It's more of a morale and propaganda thing than anything else. But unfortunately, as is the way of Warhammer and the way of the Mortal Realms, it has not gone smoothly. We know that one city will rise and one city will fall, and that leads us into some new characters and some new adventures.
You mentioned new characters there. We've got Abraxia, the Spear of the Everchosen. Can you tell us a little bit about her backstory? Because we've not seen her before.
We discussed a little bit about how she's the preeminent warlord of Chaos and the leader of the Varangard, Archaon's right-hand woman. She grew up in the fighting pits of the Varanspire, the 8 Points. So this is a kind of a sub-realm where Chaos rules. It's Archaon's seat of power. And she was born there, she grew up there, and she has had a very bloody history from day one, from being an infant really, all the way up to her current incarnation. She's had to strive to overcome all the Chaos tyrants and rivals and would-be kings. And she's risen to the top. She really is that good, to the point that Archaon is testing her, essentially, and testing her as a general by giving her the most powerful stuff and the most elite troops. She better not fail.
We've seen the forces of destruction, the forces of order. This feels like a culmination, and now we're seeing sort of chaos stamp its mark on the Twin-Tailed Crusade. Can you give us a little hint as to what the plan is here?
Obviously, the forces of order have by no means overtaken the lands or conquered what they lost. Chaos is still very much in the driving seat in Age of Sigmar. The forces of Sigmar, the God King, are trying to strike back, and they've made some inroads and some beachheads, but 9/10 of the land is still in the forces of darkness, one way or another. So every time Sigmar tries to set something up, there's a Chaos force nearby waiting to knock it down. And we've seen various incarnations of that over the years. But this is a real precision strike. This is Archaon sending out his brightest and his best to make a counter-statement to say, no, you don't get to found 2 new cities. I'm going to destroy those. Everything you set up, I'll knock down. So we're really seeing a battle effectively between Sigmar and Archaon here, but through his foremost general, through his champion. And she's a really interesting character.
So you've mentioned that the forces of chaos have been knocking down everything that the forces of order have attempted to build. Now, in this book, there's mention of the Nexus Chaotica. Can you give us a little bit of information about what that is? Because I think that's relevant to this.
I love that thing. It's just so metal. Essentially, this is a kind of like a power siphon, a chaos engine, really. And where they place these things, much like the Dawnbringers are trying to put their Nexus siphons and their aquiliths and essentially drain the land of the magical force or employ the magical inherent force of the realms. The Chaos version is corrupting and twisting and bleeding the realms dry, and that's what we see in this form. So any wizard, any sorcerer, Chaos sorcerer near that can draw on the power from the Nexus Chaotica. It's like another sign that Chaos is striking back.
Well, that was fantastic. There's a lot to look forward to there. Thank you very much for joining me, Phil.
No problem.
And for everybody at home, there's some more fantastic reveals coming.
Now we are cooking. Another set of absolutely awesome releases and some really insightful stuff from the studios on what's to come too. Very exciting stuff. Now, time for a little teaser and another reveal.
Well, Alex, I may be no lore master, but I'm pretty sure I could put 2 and 2 together based on what we've just seen. Or maybe that should be 1 and 0 because it's binary.
Indeed, there were some fantastic clues there, including one big red one.
Yeah, and of course, if you reckon you know what it is yourself, why not join us on social media and tell us what you reckon it is?
Head over to Warhammer Community for all of the details, and don't go anywhere, we've got some more fantastic reveals coming. So, we've just seen a fantastic video showing off some beautiful models for the Dwarven Mountain Holds. So these guys are getting some attention now in the old world. Thank you guys for joining me. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Dwarven Mountain Holds and how they play?
So what we've seen is a whole bunch of classic miniatures that are going to be coming back to the range. I know a lot of Warhammer players are very excited to see some of these miniatures come back, but we've also just had a very gentle teaser of some of the new stuff that might be coming alongside some of the other bits and bobs we've got going on with the Dwarven Mountain Holds.
Brilliant. So we saw warriors, longbeards.
Yeah, we saw some Thunderers and Quarrelers, we saw warriors, we saw Longbeards. The other things that we've seen in there, we've seen some of the Slayer units. We've seen our Goblin Hewer returning. We've seen our Doomseekers coming back, and championing the Slayers, we've also seen a brand new miniature that I imagine we'll dive into in a little bit.
We also saw some range there with the cannons, and just in that last shot there with the whole army, we saw the Anvil of Doom in the background.
Yes, yeah. Dwarf players will rejoice at the return of the Anvil of Doom, I'm sure. Boosting and bolstering the Dwarven lines and sort of smiting some runes to have a go at the enemy as well. And no Dwarven line is complete without some artillery.
Oh, of course. What sort of artillery can we expect? Because we've seen some of them in the Forces of Fantasy.
So we've got the classic bolt thrower and grudge throwers returning. Any traditional dwarf worth their salt will be happy to see those returning. And then we've got some of the newfangled things. We've got cannons and organ guns returning as well. So even those younger, more sort of up-and-coming engineers who like their black powder will be happy to see them coming back.
So in the Forces of Fantasy, you were always able to bring, say, a gun line or quite a static force. They could move a little bit, but what does this the range bring now? What other ways can we play Dwarven Mountain Holds?
Well, as you say, you've got your very traditional sort of gun line that we've seen in previous editions. Lots of thunderers and artillery sort of being arrayed on a hill and blasting away at the foe as they come. But you've got sort of the more dwarven traditional approach of relying on good old-fashioned technology that's worked for generations. You things, your quarrelers and, as I say, your bolt throwers and your grudge throwers, and just good old-fashioned dwarven steel. Sometimes there's nothing more satisfying than taking a well-made dwarven axe and applying it to some goblins.
Speaking of slightly older miniatures, I did notice a certain dwarf on a cart in that video.
Yes, we do have the return of the Bugman's cart.
So obviously one of the things we saw was a beautiful army shot at the end there with everything ready to go. How would you go about starting a Dwarven Mountain Holds force? What would you bring together as your core, and what might you add to that afterwards?
So the backbone, the core of any dwarf army is the warriors and the missile troops, be that handguns or quarrelers. Dwarves traditionally fight in shield walls, fighting with great weapons and their shields interlocked together, supported by dwarves carrying crossbows and handguns, and all of this supported with lots of artillery, from very traditional dwarf artillery pieces like the bolt throwers, the grudge throwers, more modern war machines such as cannons and flame cannons, and less honourable war machines such as the Goblin Hewer. All of this capped off and supported by airborne cavalry in the form of gyrocopters and gyro bombers. Some of these are quite new inventions, some of these are quite old traditional things that dwarfs rely on.
The core box, that dwarf warrior box, how flexible is that? Because I remember in the past that, you could build it with hand weapons, with great weapons. So how does that feature into the new army?
Oh, it's a very flexible kit, as it always was. As you say, it allows you to build dwarf warriors with hand weapons and shields, dwarf warriors with great weapons. The alternative kit, the missile troops, allows you to build them with dwarf handguns or crossbows. So again, very, very diverse kits that can be used to make warriors in different types, also can be used to make rangers, can be used to make missile troops. Lots and lots of variety from just a few kits.
So these are the dual kits that are returning, the hammerers and longbeards, and the iron breakers and iron drakes.
Yeah, these are the kits that represent the more elite parts of your army, the hammerers being the Thanes and the King's personal bodyguard, the longbeards being the older, more seasoned dwarfs who grumble their way through a battle but are not very afraid of anything. The solid backbone of the army, the dwarfs who the young beardlings look to for leadership and inspiration.
When protecting a king, we can't not mention that gorgeous new miniature. We've got a king on 3 dwarven warriors on a big old shield being carried around. What's it like working with that kit?
The new dwarf king with shield bearers, it's a stunning kit. Allows you to make a dwarf king with shield bearers and an alternate dwarf king or thane on foot. The astute watchers will have noticed that the shield is now borne aloft by 3 dwarfs, not 2, making it a far more large and impressive kit that takes up the space of 4 models within a unit, and looks absolutely amazing when when ranked up amongst the hammerers, amongst their personal bodyguard. This is a kit that comes with a couple of different build options. You can have the Dwarf King with a hand weapon and shield being borne aloft, and a Thane on foot with a great weapon, or vice versa. You can change the components up and build it in a couple of different ways.
So obviously the setting of the old world is several hundred years before the reign of Karl Franz. Are there any returning characters we might expect, as dwarves are quite a long-lived race? So I can imagine there might be some people or names that we can recognise that are still alive, now and later on?
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, dwarfs are quite long-lived. So there's definitely going to be a few names that people will recognise from the old days of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. One character who I believe we saw there in the video was Ungrim Ironfist, and in our time period, he is the king of the Slayerhold. And what we get to look at him now as a younger, more vibrant, more active dwarf. And he's not the only one. There's going to be a couple of other characters whose names will definitely be recognised.
Certainly taller.
Yeah, he's certainly taller.
So we've seen some brilliant older models coming back and a couple of glimpses at some fantastic new ones. Thank you very much for showing us everything and for telling us all about them. Dan, Jonathan, thank you for joining us.
Our pleasure.
For those of you watching at home, there's some more fantastic reveals coming up, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. Enjoying yourself? Good. Don't forget, you can let us know which releases you're most excited about by hitting us up on any of our socials. And you can remind yourself of all the releases you've seen after the show over on the Warhammer community website too. I know, you've seen enough of me and I promised some more 40k action, didn't I? Well, let's dive back in with some more announcements and maybe even another little teaser too.
So there we go, the new Kill Team Battle Box is on its way. It's called Termination, and we've got Tom and Elliot from the Warhammer studio to tell us all about it. Welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for joining us. So first of all, let's have a look at what we're dealing with. These guys are pretty awesome. It's set on Beta Decima by the look of it. Can you tell us about how the story's evolved since last time?
So you could say Beta Decima has had a bit of a tough time recently with the Gallodark event. The Genestealer cult have taken over the whole planet. They've got orbital defense platforms and military bases and the capital city and things like that. And so the Jaegers are part of a larger fleet that is actually shadowing a Tyranid hive fleet. And they have been following this Tyranid hive fleet as it's been absorbing the biomatter of planet after planet. So they're allowing it to fatten up, filled with delicious advanced biomaterials and things like that. So they're waiting for the perfect time to ambush this hive fleet in a giant space battle. And so the Jaegers have been sent out in a scouting ship to see where they're going and to make sure that there's a whole area of space where the Leagues of Voting get to work without being interrupted by anybody else. Unfortunately, they fly close to Beta Decima that seems to have gone through some tough times, and they are engaged by Genestealer-controlled orbital defense weapons that manage to take them by surprise and shoot their ship down. So the Jaegers find themselves crash-landed and massively outnumbered by the Genestealer cult. So the Genestealer cult deploy their Broodbrother kill team to make an example of these interlopers.
So in terms of the Leagues of Votan, the Hernkin, we've only seen them as the pioneers riding around on their cool Magna Core bikes, right? What are the Hernkin Jaegers and how do they actually play in Kill Team?
So they're a brand new unit for the Leagues of Votan. Like you said before, the Hernkin we've seen are the pioneers, who are the ones on the bikes. These are the Jaegers. So they're still part of the Hernkin, but they have a slightly different role. Now the Hernkin's primary role is the scouts. They're the advanced party of the Leagues of Votan, if you like. So they range ahead of the rest of the fleet and the rest of the forces. They will identify locations of importance and drop markers or beacons or relay the information back to the rest of their kin. But sometimes they'll need to leave a presence there. And that's where the Jaegers come in. So the Jaegers are an incredibly self-sufficient commando unit, if you like. and they'll get deployed at locations that are identified by the Hernkin. And then they'll conduct acts of sabotage, assassination, disruption for extended periods on their own with very little support or reinforcement. So when the rest of their kin arrive, they're effectively mopping up all the great work that all the Jaegers have done, whilst they take it easy back on the ship, I suppose. But yeah, they're really, really self-sufficient and conduct sort of guerrilla warfare type battles. That's their purpose. In the game, they have a lot of unique rules. So sort of a hybrid between extremely elite and more of the more numerous teams that sort of sit in the middle. One of the first things they do is they like to control the board. So they've set up their traps and their positions early, ready to ambush people. And so they have some funky ways of doing that. First of all, you can set them up further into the kill zone and get that early board space and make that yours. They also have a load of mines you can litter around the battlefield so that you're really forcing your opponent to move specifically or otherwise take the damage from those mines, which is fun. And then they also have something quite unique called resourceful points. Because they're very, very self-sufficient and flexible and adaptable, if you like. They can generate these points that you can then spend them to either heal some wounds if you start to lose some wounds, but you can also add one to their APL to do more actions, that kind of thing.
That's always nasty.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really, really useful, and especially because it's reactive, so I can keep these points and then spend it the moment I need to, which is unlike a lot of other APL rules where you normally have to set it up and it's a bit more telegraphed. This is a little more reactive, which is quite nice.
Nice.
They've also got some really, really funky operatives that do some unique things. First, we got the Tracker, who has these cool goggles and a crossbow and a throwing axe.
Crossbow?
Oh, yes. It gives this operative a real, like, woodsman, hunter type feel, which is really nice. You've also got my favourite one, the Bombast. This one has a rule called Rortlock Negotiation. Which is named after its Rortlock revolvers. Negotiates with the revolvers, of course, which is really cool. And that allows this operative to very, very start the turning point, get some shots in before anyone else, which is really, really fun. So you've got a Magna Coil rifle from your sniper. And so overall, they're a really, really fun team that likes to fight on their terms. Like I said, whether that's they've set up the board for themselves and force you to go specific ways. And then fight in a real guerrilla play style. So as long as they're controlling the narrative and they're in control of the game, that's when they're going to shine the best. So yeah, they're a really, really fun team.
So onto the Brood Brothers themselves. Now they're quite a sort of sub-faction of the Genestealer cults themselves. For those who don't know about it, would you like to explain more about what the Brood Brothers are?
Yeah, so the Brood Brothers are Astra Militarum Imperial Guard that have been, brought onto the side of the Genestealer cult. They are normally waiting in hiding within loyalist regiments. They can sometimes be, we've talked about in the background of this book, where they can sometimes be the most effective squad of an Imperial Guard platoon, for example, and the commander loves them until the day of revolution happens and then they turn on their sort of loyalist companions. This particular Brood Brother squad that we want to capture here is the most elite version of a Brood Brothers. They are veteran guardsmen who have fought in many campaigns, who have either been Genestealers all along and been in hiding, or they've been turned to the side of the Genestealers. So they have tons of combat experience. They use lots of special weapons that the Imperial Guard use and things like that. And they are the bodyguard squad for the Brood Coven. So they protect the highest leaders of the Genestealer cult during, the dangerous points of a revolution.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, shall we deal with the four-armed elephant in the room? The Patriarch, that's going to be in the Brood Brothers kill team, is it? That's a terrifying notion. I'm kind of morbidly interested, yet really intimidated to find out more about it.
They're the scariest operative to date, for sure. So yeah, we've had a lot of fun with this operative. It's quite costly. It costs you numerous other operatives if you want to take them. So so effectively, you're going to have a choice each game whether to take the Patriarch or one of the other ones, which we'll talk about later. Double activation, they can activate twice, really fun. They can even mind control the opponent's operatives, which is to make them do actions, which is just really, really cool. So it's a lot of fun, a real all-star of this team, for sure, yeah.
Wow. So we've got loads of others. We've got the Mages, of course, a full-on dedicated psyker, really, and the Primus, who's the tactical mastermind of the Genestealer cults. How do they work as well?
Yeah, so the Magus is the spiritual leader of the cult, so you have a lot more support rules from that operative. It's also a very powerful psyker, so you've got some cool psychic unique actions to do. And then the Primus is the strategic military mastermind of the cult. So that's going to give you extra CP, influence over initiative, which is really important, and they're also a good fighter to boot as well. But between those three operatives, you've actually got quite a lot of flexibility on how you want to play them, depending on what your opponent's playing, that kind of thing. And like Tom was saying before, they're also an elite veteran guardsman squad, effectively. So if you don't want to play with one of the Brood Coven and you just want to take extra operatives, they're more than worth doing as well, because they have lots of really funky interaction rules between them, which makes this team quite a flex team. You can really change how you want to play them depending on what you want for that game.
So what exactly do we have in the box then?
So in the box, you get these two new pieces of terrain. All the other terrain here is from the Killzone Beta Decima stuff that you can get separately. Then you've got both of the teams. There's quite a lot of models in here because we've added the Brood Coven as well. So in terms of models, it's one of the sort of heftiest model amounts that you get in a Kill Team box. You also then get card packs for each of the teams with data cards, with equipment cards, all the sort of stuff you've seen in Salvation for the Scouts and the Scorpions. And then also a book with all of your missions, your background, team rules in there as well. Token sheets for both the teams. So the Jaegers get their minefield tokens, which have blank sides as well, so you don't know which ones are real, which ones aren't. So basically, all of the the best rules reference and stuff. We wanted to make sure people kind of get not just a book, but everything they could want in this box.
Well, that is Kill Team Termination. Thanks again for joining us, Tom and Elliot, and letting us know all about it. Sounds super cool. Can't wait for it. Keep your eyes out. It's coming soon. But before you go, we've got even more stuff on its way, so stick around.
So that was our second teaser trailer. It looks like we're heading back to Necromunda. What do you think, Si?
It does indeed, yeah. Necromunda's a big place, of course, so it could be set anywhere. Who knows? Indeed. Who knows? And, of course, some shiny new miniatures by the look of it as well. If you reckon you know the answers to these questions, folks, make sure you join us on social media and let us know what you think.
And for more information, head to warhammercommunity.com.
I cannot believe it. Even more fantastic announcements, and even that teaser I promised as well. Who knew? Well, I reckon that's about it. Oh, I almost forgot. There is just one more thing to show you. Enjoy.
Sigmar lied. Sigmar told us we were chosen. Warriors, stolen from death. To be reforged as his weapons. The immortal sons and daughters of the Storm God. Sigmar lied. He never told us the true cost of this honor. Soon, all that will remain of me is an echo, lost to the storm. But until that day, I fight.
Yes, it's official. Warhammer Age of Sigmar's new edition is here and is coming very, very soon. I'm joined by Ben and Phil and Matt from the AOS studios to chat about all things Age of Sigmar. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
First of all, let's jump straight in with that cinematic. I mean, come on, that thing is absolutely amazing. We were blown away by that. Let's talk about some of your top highlights from the cinematic trailer.
I mean, it was gobsmacking. The first time we saw it, we were like, what? It's just absolute tour de force. We've been working with these characters and these different factions for a while, but seeing them brought to life in that way, it just pitch perfect, really something.
Yeah, I love that they've worked so hard on that as well. You can tell that they're really bringing those sort of like miniatures to life. That bit where the Skaven comes sort of like rolling down that hill with the rattling gun is just absolutely amazing as well. So obviously this event is sort of huge in the cinematic trailer that we've just seen, but obviously it's just a small glimpse into the threat that the Mortal Realms are facing right now. So let's talk a little bit about the lore and sort of where we find ourselves in the narrative of Age of Sigmar. So whereabouts are we now?
The hour of ruin has dawned, right? It's a new era for Age of Sigmar. So we've just come out of the era of the Beast, very destruction focused. Chaos strikes back. We've seen the Skaven enter play in a great cataclysm called the Vermin Doom. That was the big explosion with all the stuff rising out of the ground. That's an entire nation of Skaven. It's not just a small area. Has gate crashed the party. A full third of the Great Parch is now completely destroyed and replaced by Blight City, the Skaven otherworld, and they are pouring out of there in their billions. So the Stormcast Eternals and their mates better shore up those gaps pretty quickly, because that tide is coming and it's not stopping anytime soon.
Nice. So you chatted a little bit about the Skaven there and sort of how the mortal realms have sort of been reforged and stuff. So let's chat a little bit about the Skaven. What makes them so much more dangerous and so much more sort of horrifying in this new edition?
Well, we've seen the Skaven before. They're old friends, aren't they? We've all grown up with Skaven in a way. They're so Warhammer. What we're seeing now is not just a few of them creeping around in the sewers, but a real tidal wave of these things. And the horror of the Skaven really is coming through, as well as the humour, because of course there are a few beats of them running away and getting speared, and they're a giant rattling blaster form.
The Claw Lord.
The Claw Lord just bailing. There's still that sense of humour to the Skaven, and their kind of slightly charming cowardice. But we are also seeing the Skaven on their best day, which is pretty terrifying, with all the weird Frankensteinian monsters and technology and numbers, just plain numbers. So there are, they're really coming as never before, and that's kind of fun to see them come out of the shadows like that.
Yeah, totally. And we can't talk about the Skaven without mentioning the Stormcast Eternals, obviously. So let's chat a little bit about the Hallowed Knights and the Ruination Chamber as well. Tell us about that.
Sigmar hit the big button, didn't he, and opened another chamber. The Ruination Chamber, these guys, as we saw in the main character in the trailer, been reforged so many times. They're starting to lose that little bit of themselves, losing that thing that made them human, and they're turning into incredible warriors that can go into some of those really awful places in the Mortal Realm. So we saw that, didn't we? The regular Stormcast are there, and there's bits of their armour coming away because they can't quite get in there. But the guys from the Ruination Chamber, in they go. We are the guys to do that.
Yeah, that's almost the benefit they get from their immortality is a curse. We've talked about this. So it might seem like a blessing to be these big, strong heroes and they've got all the kit, but really they're dying over and over again. That's not a good thing, and they're paying the price.
Oh, and that was really one of my favorite things from the trailer. I think it's the first time we've, really been able to show that so clearly. Both the blessing of immortality, but as Phil said, the curse of the immortality and the kind of character that we see throughout the trailer, seeing that journey, both of becoming more veteran and becoming more elite and a stronger warrior, but then losing that aspect of the humanity, and ultimately near the end of that journey, becoming kind of so jaded, so having seen so many horrors and lived through so many horrors and so many deaths, that these are kind of some of the only people that can venture into this absolute horror that's emerged across the mortal realms.
Let's chat a little bit about rules then as well. So what can players expect to experience with this new edition of Age of Sigmar?
This will be the biggest shift in rules since the introduction of Age of Sigmar. This is the first ground-up rewrite of the rule set for Age of Sigmar since the very first edition came out. We really had three major goals in mind when we were doing that. The first was opening up the game to more players than ever. Really trying to make sure that the game was easy to learn, easy for new players to get into, yet retaining the tactical depth that makes it really difficult to master, where you could spend years and years playing and gaining that skill and that skill expression. The second thing was building on the interactivity in third edition with more reactive commands and more opportunities for counterplay in your opponent's turn. And all of that kind of comes together in these really nail-biting finishes, these really closely fought battles where every game can be exciting and tense. And this is such a big shift for the rules, such a big update that not only have we done a major update to all the core rules, but also every faction will be getting brand new rules for this edition. So there's lots and lots of exciting things to look forward to coming up soon.
Yeah. So you guys were obviously heavily involved in the development of the new edition. One thing that I really, really want to know is what got yourselves and some of the playtesters most excited about this new edition?
There's a lot to chew over.
So the bit for me that I really love, I think it's a small change but it has huge impacts, is combat range. So weapon ranges have gone away. So for melee, and everything now runs off combat range, so a 3-inch range, and that works for things like claiming objectives, how characters can interact with other units, how benefits can be applied, and then also in combat. And it just makes that combat phase so much slicker, so much quicker to play than it ever has before.
Yeah.
For me, I think you touched on it there, is that it is slicker, it's easier to play. And I'm big into telling a story on the battlefield and seeing, having those games which you talk about 10 years later. And having the rules almost get out of the way to be able to do that. And the way we've made these rules, they're so accessible and easy to use, we'll come to that in a minute, that it's far easier to see the ebb and flow of the battle and to do cool stuff on the battlefield. It's really good fun.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really been kind of learning from all of the editions in the past. Through that work of making it more accessible, what we're really doing is trying to make it more elegant as a rule set, and looking for opportunities to really merge down without losing any of that tactical depth and any of that skill expression that comes
and the flavour and the lore that comes through in these war scrolls and on the battlefield.
I think you've said before, Matt, as well, we've got almost a decade's worth of knowledge now and feedback from players all over the world to be able to put into that.
Well, and just our own lived experiences, the amount of the games that we've played, and we all love the game and love the system. So this is really a culmination of that, and I couldn't be more excited to get it into players' hands.
That's great. So let's talk Spearhead as well, because this is a brand new way for players to play Age of Sigmar. Talk to us about that. What tell us everything about Spearhead that we need to know.
Gosh, everything. So Spearhead, it comes in the launch box. So everything you need to play Spearhead, the models, the board, the terrain, the cards, the rules for every faction as well are all included in the box, so you can play it straight out of the box on day one.
As you said, a brand new way to play the game. It's a small format game. It uses a lot of brand new mechanics people haven't seen before. There's really compelling card mechanics for tactics and commands. And it's just, a really, really exciting, really fast and furious, and very balanced way to play the game.
That speed is what's taken the studio by storm, isn't it? The amount of games that are played, because you can play it in an hour, play it at lunchtime really easily.
But there's still all that tactical depth. It really feels like you're still playing a big war game. You're playing Warhammer, but it's a lot easier to do. And each of the spearheads has been really well balanced against the other. Even if it looks like you might have the advantage, so Indrasta's spearhead, Indrasta being a very powerful champion of Sigmar and her elite Stormcast Eternals, the real punch of that spearhead doesn't show up till halfway through the game. That gives a kind of inbuilt narrative to the game. So you've got this scenario where your normal Stormcaster trying to hold the line and hold back the enemy, and then pow, straight halfway through the battle, in comes Indrasta and her Annihilators to swing it back. So there's like an inbuilt story to that. There are choices you can make, so you can still give your guys different command traits or artifacts. You can give your army different ways to fight. And of course, the board is double-sided, so you've got Akshi side on one side, if you want to fight in Akshi, fire and passion. On the other side is Gairan, which is much more lush vegetation, healing, and the cycle of life. And the cards that you pick up every turn will give you different objectives. Go there, kill that, get your dudes over that side. So there is an extremely large amount of ramifications of games you can play with Spearhead.
It must be so great for sort of experienced players to be able to get games in really quick, but also players that might be new to kind of AOS being able to pick that up, and also great for like the tournament scene as well. If you can play X amount of games in a certain amount of time, that must be great.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Early on in the development of Spearhead, we brought in a group of kind of veteran playtesters. It ended up turning into effectively a tournament over the weekend where they all got really, really into it and really competitive. And so this is something that we've seen really resonate with players, and people gain a lot of excitement for it.
I think what's been fun from like an experienced player is picking up any Spearhead, and just because there's so few rules around their battle traits and there's so few war scrolls involved, that you can just pick it up and play a game and not feel like you're missing out on anything. So there's quite a lot of times when we go into the playtest room to play a game and go, what are we going to play with? You know, I've not played with the Glimpse Like Gits for a while, so you take those off the shelf and you can have a game. And again, it's still around about an hour, even with something that you've not played for a while.
You're just working your way through them. Yeah, that's great. Let's chat a little bit about faction packs as well, because I know you mentioned this earlier, Matt. You've used this new edition as a really good opportunity to sort of update and rebalance and rewrite all of the units for the armies in Age of Sigmar. So let's chat about that a little bit.
Because there's such kind of sweeping changes throughout the rule set, it was really the perfect opportunity to go back and revisit factions. We had some playtest games early on and some conversations early on where, you know, it was a big kind of learning point for us that, you know, the game could never be, would never be less complex than the most complex faction. Because you might either be playing with that faction or against that faction. And so, you know, a lot of that same approach to streamlining and really trying to focus in on the most impactful rules, the most characterful rules, but removing a lot of the other detail that maybe you had to manage before. So a really good example is the reintroduction of a limited set of universal special rules. So things like champions or standard bearers, musicians, you know, some weapon abilities. You know, now instead of needing a full rule on each war scroll to explain how this works, you can just say champion, and everyone knows how that works, and it, you know, that part becomes really, really clean, really easy to do. So it makes each war scroll much faster to read, much easier to use. Every single war scroll fits on a single-sided card. With all of the information, kind of no matter how big the character, how powerful the character.
We've also done quite a lot of work on stats and characteristics as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So an awful lot of time spent in our playtest room lining models up, putting them in categories. How many wounds should this unit of cavalry have? How many wounds should this one have? So that it makes a lot more sense visually when you just look at the battlefield and you can see, well, what sort of armor save, what sort of movement should this unit have, what health should this unit have. So it's all a lot more consistent now.
I think one of my favourite parts of that is that the colour coding system, quite visual. We like to look at the battlefield and look at our war scrolls and our books, and each ability has a colour to go with it to tell you what phase you use that ability in. So you're not having to go through all of your rules all the time. You just
we've all played that game where we've forgotten one, haven't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, could have done that. Yeah.
And that's just really easy way to pass the rules and to know what you can do at certain times.
We've really tried to look from a lore perspective, from a miniatures perspective, from a rules perspective. One of our main tenets of the game is that the rules reflect the mortal realms, right? And so we think the game works best when all three of those things are working in concert, where it feels intuitive to players. And so this is really the first time we've been able to go back and really differentiate the different races, the different units, the different factions, and give them much more of an identity through the characteristics.
So these war scrolls, they'll be free to access on launch, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's digital versions of them available at launch. and there's also card versions of them as well, so you can have them laid out in gaming table.
Also, we've got updated rules for all of the armies of renown, regiments of renown, content from the Dawnbringer series that you've been playing through, all updated for the new edition.
Everybody gets something new and cool to look through.
Yes.
Hopefully it will inspire you to telling great stories on the battlefield and having a lot of games of Age of Sigmar. So yeah, hope you will enjoy it.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, Ben, Phil, Matt, thank you so much for joining us and coming into the studio to chat a little bit about Age of Sigmar. We cannot wait for it.
No worries.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Well, that's all we've got time for. What a show and what a series of announcements. Thank you to Adepticon for having us, and thank you to you for being with us. We hope you've enjoyed it just as much as we have. Remember, you can head to the Warhammer community website if you'd like to find out more about any of the upcoming releases. And don't forget to follow us on all our socials to keep up to date with all the latest news. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on the Warhammer Preview Show.